Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Door to Door. I'm Virginia Stanley, and I'm joined by my Library Love Fest cohort.
Hi, everyone. It's Essie. It's good to see you all.
We're so excited today. Lainey is not in today, so Essie and I are running the show. As you know, we have our Galley Club, and we're very excited with the launch of that. And today we have a unique conversation between author and editor. So we're going to bring on our author, Jess Walter, and his editor, Millicent Bennett, and they're going to talk about Jess's forthcoming book, which will be out in, I think it's May. No, June.
No, June.
June. So there's The Angel of Rome and Other Stories by Jess Walter. And, Essie and I were talking about this book and this collection and how powerful these stories are, and the characters that are, they wrap themselves around you, and it's hard to stop thinking about them. We were just talking about it this morning. Right, Essie?
That's right. I'm so excited to talk to Jess about them. You read them and they don't leave you alone. You can't, like you said, you can't forget them as soon as you read them.
Right. So, okay. So without further ado, let's bring on Millicent and Jess, and we will do a quick introduction and then turn it over to them. Hi, Jess. Hi, Millicent.
Hi, Virginia. Hi, Essie.
Hello.
Hey, thank you both for taking the time to talk to librarians today about Jess's new book and some of his previous books, which have all just been juggernaut sellers and have, as I say, Jess, we were talking about how your books are all so different. I think Nancy Pearl was one of the first people to say that Jess Walter never writes the same book twice.
Yeah, the few times I heard it as a bit of a complaint from people, let us pin you down a little bit. But I remember being in Powell's bookstore one time and them saying, we're thinking of starting our own section that's just the Jess Walter room. And that was the nicest thing anyone had ever said to me, But I tend to think, like most readers, I want to read something different almost every time. And so I tend to want to write something different.
Well, indeed, you do just that. And so the backlist, your backlist is just plentiful and beautiful. Speaking of beautiful, beautiful ruins, being one of my all-time favorite Jess Walter books. So I'm going to do a quick introduction of you, Jess, and you, Millicent, and then Essie and I, sorry as it's running off my tongue. Essie and I are going to come off the screen, so it's the two of you, but we'll be watching questions. So librarians, send in your comments, your questions for Jess and Millicent. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So join in the conversation. So hang on one second here. So Essie, while I'm pulling that up, can you just show the slide one more time of Jess's backlist?
That is quite a backlist. Hard to fit them all on one page.
I like how slimming that slide is too. It looks so tall.
They're just such wonderful reads and so powerful. Jess, you are the author of 9 books. Did I get that right?
Well,
10.
The Angel of Rome will be the 10th.
That will be the 10th. Yep, 9 published books.
Yes.
Right. That's 9 published books. And most recently, the national bestseller, The Cold Millions, and the #1 New York Times bestseller, Beautiful Ruins. The Zero was a finalist for the National Book Award, and Citizen Vince won the Edgar Award. Your work has been published in 32 languages, and your short fiction has appeared 3 times in Best American Short Stories. Your 10th book, due out June 2022, is called The Angel of Rome and Other Stories. This is a terrific, beautiful, compelling collection of short stories that feature this wildly diverse cast of characters grappling with the modern dilemma of managing the persona they're trying to project and hiding from the person they might actually be. Hello. So true in just about every story. I mean, they're just such great characters. And Oh, I just love this book. So you're bouncing from Idaho to Italy, and the characters stay with you long after you've turned the last page. All of your books have been widely praised, but I particularly love this quote from Kirkus for your blockbuster book, The Cold Millions. This Kirkus gave it a star review, Natch. And so the fact that the same author has written books as wildly different and as transporting as The Zero, Financial Lives of the Poets, Beautiful Ruins, and now this latest Tour de Force is testimony to Walter's storytelling power and astounding ability to set a scene, any scene. We have heard that Jess Walter writes nonstop, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Please never stop. Please don't.
Oh. Probably couldn't at this point.
Yeah, I bet, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
True,
And
yes.
what
Is that true?
is it?
I did take Christmas off this year, but it's my hobby. It's like every time, to me, the computer is like a guitar sitting in the corner. It's hard to not pick it up and start playing. I don't write well every day. Notice I've never claimed that, but I do try to, I carry this around. I almost always have this just to jot things in. So I always feel like I'm observing and noticing, and that's sort of the first step of writing.
Well, it's going to be interesting to talk about travel and how that inspires so much of your writing. And as I said before, the book does go from Idaho to Italy and everywhere in between. And these characters are just wonderful. So, Millicent Bennett, your editor. Millicent, you're the executive editor at Harper, and you came over to Harper in the Houghton Mifflin integration, where you had been editorial director of the General Interest Group. So now here at Harper, you are Jess's editor, and we're thrilled to have you here to talk about this new relationship between the two of you. And, you know, author editor relationships are unique to begin with. And I think this is like we were saying, sort of a subset of unique, because you're sort of new to each other. So I've said what I want to say. We will hop in and out, but we're going to turn the conversation over to Millicent and to Jess. Please, librarians, type in your questions because we will be asking them. So without further ado, we're going to turn off our cameras and microphones and turn it over to Millicent and Jess. Thank you both.
Thank you, Virginia and Essie. It's I have to say, I said this to you, Jess, when I sort of had our first call when, you know, we found out we'd be working together, but I've been a fan of yours for so many years. And I'd been hearing everything about Beautiful Ruins for a very long time, and only get a chance to read for pleasure, I feel like, when I, am on maternity leave. I hope that doesn't mean I just keep having babies, but it is, when I get to read the things I really want to read. And so the first thing I did was sit down with Beautiful Ruins, in those kind of first newborn days, and just absolutely devoured it, and knew you were brilliant from there, but then ran out to my really only kind of trip out of the house in that newborn forest was to go buy We Live in Water. And that, again, like, that was my first experience of how very different your books are, and how incredible your range is. And those stories just, broke me apart in the best possible way.
Well, I think there are worse reasons to have children than decline reading time. So I think I'm all for it. I
may be the only person who can do like true pleasure reading while I'm while I have newborns, but
thank you. And similarly, like, looking at the list of writers you've worked with, and even as I'm working on my new novel and I'm deep in the midst of researching in a book, and I realized that Millicent was the editor for it, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So yeah, I'm excited. It is a little like we met on the literary dating game or something, so we are so much at the beginning of the process. And it's interesting because, yet neither of us is new to the business. So we both have probably our ways of working on things. I'm really curious to see, with the next novel, especially, how that will work. Yeah,
I know we do have, many books under each of our belts in various ways. And I always think it's, because my career has sort of taken me to various different imprints over the years, I've had the opportunity to inherit many authors, not all of them ones that I, was like a wild fangirl of in the past, but, as I was of yours, but it's really, it's always such an interesting approach to the relationship, because sometimes you inherit an author when they're, haven't, the new book hasn't been edited at all. And so this is, it's a kind of natural beginning. Sometimes you show up at the end of the editing process and at the beginning of the, campaign. And when, you're advocating for this book out in the world, and I mean, in the publishing house first, and then out in the world. And sometimes in the most sort of confusing and hectic of moments, you arrive partway through an edit, which I think is probably the most disruptive for an author, but thankfully did not happen in this case.
Right. Yeah.
And, I know that sort of there's so much kind of terror in the author world about losing an editor. And I think there's a fear that maybe you don't, your new editor won't love you as much as your old editor did, or won't, be as committed to the book because they, haven't been there from the beginning.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because from the author standpoint, there's that, it's there are different stages of vulnerability when you turn in a manuscript. I'm really shy about anybody seeing the unedited, unfinished work. And so there's trust that has to happen, but it's also, when I love getting edited. I'm maybe rare in that way, but I love that. I love having someone improve the work, but it really takes me 24 to 48 hours to process any note, because the first reaction is just bitter, stinging rejection. It's like, what do you mean that comma's not right? I quit. I'm done. And so, it's to be able to work with a writer at their most vulnerable, at several of their most vulnerable points, because then when you're about to take it out to the world, as authors can be basket cases. We can await that first review or or sales numbers or any of those things with such terror. And so it is interesting, to see. But to have an ally make the work better has always been, for me, just the greatest part of this of the experience. And I've worked, you'll be only the third editor I've worked with, and that sense of trust and the first other set of eyes to see a work and tell you what they get out of it is so important. You are writing something to share with the world, and once it escapes up here, that first read has to be both nuanced and sensitive, but also really critical. And if someone can help me make the work better, after 48 hours, I'm so moved by that.
First 48 hours, not so much.
First 48 hours, it's just like that show 48 Hours. There are dead bodies and mayhem. And then I start thinking, that's right. This section is too long, or that character does need to be enhanced, or and often in ways that one of the things I've found is I like when an editor points out the experience they had reading, not necessarily the solution. Yes. Because sometimes the solution isn't exactly that. And so that's usually what happens. Is it's so helpful for me to hear about the experience reading.
I was just going to ask you that, because when I'm meeting a new editor and they ask sort of what my author, and they ask what my experience is. And the truth is, I've been doing this for so long and with so many different authors, and so, and I've done poetry and, serious nonfiction and sort of pop nonfiction and commercial fiction and literary fiction. And each book, each genre needs something special. Each, author needs something different. And often the same author needs a different sort of editorial approach, depending on which book of theirs you're working on with them. And but so the answer to how do I work is never a single answer, but I always say, left to my own devices, what I do is read through the entire manuscript first as a reader, with little tiny editor on my shoulder watching me read. So I'll take out my little Post-it notes and read through, and every time I see myself like get pulled out of the story, whether it's because I'm, wondering what happened to that character, or noticing that, there's some kind of mystery that isn't solved, or realizing I'm having a strong emotion, I flag that for myself, so that when I go back and read it as an editor, I can confirm that those are the moments, that that's doing what the author wanted to do, that that's the emotion that the author wanted me to be feeling in that moment. And if it's wrong, if in fact the author has assumed we knew that, the mother has left the house or whatever, then I know that that's something we need to address. And so I'll write a little note in the margin that says, I'm wondering about this. And sometimes I'll say, like, here, like, back here is a good spot. I think this is probably where the mom left. Yeah. Do you want to say something about it back here? And so that, that tends to be my approach, which is just figure out what the sort of author's platonic ideal of the book should be. And then, chip away at the little pieces of marble or not.
And it can be fascinating. I've had, with novels and with short stories, I've worked with some great magazine and journal editors. And sometimes an editor can explain your own story to you in a way that is so compelling and refreshing. And so there's this sort of small work of editing, but every once in a while you'll get you will have someone who can rise above the thing you've done and see it. And that's so incredibly helpful, and I think with stories, especially, it's so interesting for me because every time I get a collection of stories together, I come up with a different metaphor. The first time I thought it was like putting an album together, that I was, taking different songs and finding order, and what does one song say leading into the next. I just watched the Beatles documentary, that amazing Peter Jackson documentary, and I was sitting there the whole time thinking, that's what it's like putting a story collection together. But then other times I go much more lowbrow and think that it's like a yard sale, as we've said, that I'm just searching through my treasures and I want to put them out. Here's this trip to Italy, and here is a woman picking up an actor at a bar or at a party in Bend, Oregon, and they're these treasures are worth so much to me, but the only thing of sort of cohering them is that they're all out there together. So that can be really helpful to another very different reading experience with short stories, because not everyone gravitates to short stories the way I do, certainly.
Yeah, and I'm a kind of terrible partner in crime on that, because short stories have always been my first love. So I was deeply appalled when I got into publishing and found out that short stories are not everyone's favorite genre and like the biggest possible bestsellers. But it really, there's something so like spectacular about that really condensed experience of like meeting these characters and going through this, life-changing often moment with them. Even, I've always thought of it as sort of there's the Flannery O'Connor school of short stories, and there's the kind of Alice Munro school of short stories, where you get more of a lifetime in the Alice Munro stories, and the turning point is like the way someone is peeling a potato, whereas the Flannery O'Connor is much more sort of in your face, and these kind of
those incredible moments and scenes that turn on one. And I love both, and find myself doing both. I've been surprised that with our fractured attention spans because of our phones and the internet, with the pandemic, that to me that's when I love short stories. I love to be able to start and stop something. I love the completion of that full movement, and I love what Tobias Wolff said about stories, that with a short story you can approach perfection. You can't get there, but no novel is even eclipsed. Novels are these big unwieldy messes that that most writers hope don't fall apart as they run down the road. But with a short story, sometimes you can and that's, I think that's one of the things that draws me to them. And then just to be able to capture that world in such a short space, to drop in on those moments that are so powerful and meaningful. The title story is a great example. I was in Trastevere, Rome, with my family, taking notes and thinking, I really want to write something in Italy. Beautiful Ruins has always sort of been half an itch that I feel like returning to, but I didn't want to tell that story exactly, but I wanted to touch on some of those themes again. And so taking those notes and then talking to Edoardo Ballerini, who is a narrator, incredible actor and narrator, and he had studied in Rome and lived in Trastevere as a young Latin student. And so I thought, we were talking and just saying, with audiobooks, they're a little bit afterthoughts. We don't write them to be performed that way. And so we had this great idea that I would write a story and Eduardo would contribute to it, and we would sort of table read it and run it back and forth. And it was so much fun, that kind of experimentation that you can do in short stories that that might take a month or 2 months or a few weeks, whereas my last novel was probably 4 years of pretty intense work. And so to do something that playful and experimental and to try something new in that amount of time, would almost be impossible. But to write a short story, that turns into a great audio story. I'm also a big fan of selected shorts, and 2 of these stories have appeared on selected shorts. And so I think there's an almost audio podcast quality to stories that make me think they should be having their moment right now. But that could just be greed, because I have a book of short stories coming out. So that might just be me wanting that moment.
No, I completely agree. And I think I feel like every few years there, a short story collection, sort of captures the attention, and everyone's like, now is the moment for short stories. And
right. Yeah.
but this moment does feel different from previous ones because of podcasts, in a way that people didn't, I speaking of me, when I first got into publishing, and I was like, what do you mean no one reads only short stories? Because you can read it on your commute to work, and this makes sense.
Yeah.
But of course that was like pre Kindles. And the people are now used to that limited time-wise limited experience.
I liken it a little bit to, I grew up next to a drive-in movie theater. And now, of course, we all want these 5-season, 16-part TV show of a novel. But I kind of loved climbing up into my tree fort and watching, a Dog Day Afternoon followed by a Clint Eastwood movie followed by a cartoon, and a story collection allows you to do that. You go to Rome, you go with someone who's trying to find a home for his father who has dementia. You go with a young woman back to the hometown where she had this disappointing boyfriend. You get to just sort of drop into these lives and close them, finish them, and move on to another one. So yeah, I'm with you. I hope that and I also think the novel has moved more towards short stories. Books like A Visit from the Goon Squad, Great Circle, that recent terrific novel. Beautiful Ruins is David Mitchell's work. Cloud Atlas, Tony Doerr's new book, Cloud Cuckoo Land. These are novels made up of stories that cohere because of theme. So I think people are reading stories often, whether they know it or not.
Exactly. I had a question for you, but it looks like Essie might also have something to tell us.
No, I didn't even want to cut into your conversation. You guys are so amazing to listen to. This whole conversation has been so great so far. I just wanted to chime in with some everyone is so excited that you're here, Jess.
thank you.
Everyone's so excited. Just going from the top, when we were talking about how different your books are and how it's such a great thing, everyone's Mammy Nay said, "Viva la difference," just like how it's such a great thing to celebrate.
Yeah.
And I also just wanted to say, like, just talking about the Angel of Rome, just the concept of Sonder, you cover it so well, just stepping into lives that are completely different, and that you're right. I mean, I agree with both of you when it comes to short stories. It's just, how could you not want to read that? It's so easy to just dive in and then dive out, like how you say, Millicent, on your train ride to work, you could just completely step into someone's life just like that. But I just wanted to compliment you on how well you did that with Angel of Rome. It's so easy and wonderful to read. Speaking of short stories,
Yes.
we have a few questions from our people here, our librarians. Jennifer Monahan Winberry asks, do you prefer, well, I guess we all know how much you love short stories, but do you prefer writing short fiction or full-length novels? This is the first question.
I think I'm a novelist by nature. I do get obsessed with things. I'm so obsessed with the idea I'm working on now that if I even utter it, I'll run away and go to my office and start working. So I have to keep it to myself. But when I finish a novel, I also really love the kind of visceral break of writing stories. And when I travel, strangely, it opens up my writing mind. And I think if you've ever traveled to a country where you don't speak the language, you are most like a writer in that moment. You are so open to the world. You're noticing everything. You're not quite in it though. You're a little bit outside it. And that feeling, going to Italy, going to New York, and sitting in a diner waiting for a play to start and imagining an entire scene unfolding, is when this journal just gets sparks fly from it. And so I've likened writing a novel to getting engaged or getting married. It's a real commitment, and sometimes it's nice to just date a little bit. And so just to write a story and and sort of find your way in and out of it, be able to be really funny, and then the next story write with great pathos, just to be able to make those turns and switches. So I do think I'm a novelist more by nature. These big stories, most of the books that I carried around when I was younger were novels, but I can't think of a better writer than Alice Munro. A book of short stories like Rebecca Lee's Bobcat will stay with me for years, and in ways that sometimes novels don't, because a different story will appeal to me. Much the way you wore out an album and you thought it was just those two songs you liked, and now you don't even listen to side A; it's only side B you listen to. And I think that's kind of what I love about story collections, is the way different songs come at you in different ways.
This is actually related to the question I wanted to ask you, which is when you think of a character or a scene or something, is there a different quality to the ones that you kind of know are going to end up as a story versus the ones that you feel like will end up being a novel? Have you ever started a story, thought of it as a story, and then it turned into a novel, or vice versa?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say the novel this happened to me the most with was The Financial Lives of the Poets. And it was just a voice, here they are again, the bent boys, baked and wasted boys in a 7-Eleven, and that voice just, I thought, would be, at first I wrote it as a poem, as a kind of terrible epic poem. And then as often happens with my poetry, the stanzas and lines break and it just becomes prose. And then it became a short story and I just kept going. But usually I see a character in a sharp situation, and that becomes, and I know that's a short story. The very first story in the collection is called Mr. Voice, and I wanted to capture this period, the early mid 1970s, and I had an aunt who always called her mom Mother, and so the very first line of the book is "Mother was a stunner," and it's this little girl, spending her life being sort of compared to this little bit of a train wreck of a mother whose just looks and at one point in the story, the mother tells her, your looks are a bank account and you'll have to cash it at some time. And it's this heartbreaking thing for this girl to hear. I knew I was writing through to that moment. And then I didn't realize what I was writing toward, but I knew with a story, I often know it's that moment and then how it plays out. It wasn't until I finished the story that I realized the last word of the story was father. And so it had begun mother and ended father. And that's the weird, nerdy joy that you get as a short story writer. You just think that song is done. Ringo can't make it any better. George can walk off. I don't care if John and Yoko are off doing something. That's a banger. They're going to play that one in the clubs. So,
yep. Yeah, I feel like that's where you feel like some kind of divine hand when you notice things like that.
And you can get in and out of that. With a novel, you might need 800 of those inspirations to get through it. But often a story has a kind of artistic closure that is so fulfilling, and novels are too. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's like a whole bunch of them up there, and I'm hoping to write more if I can keep it up. But there is something really unique about that feeling of having finished, both read and written a great story.
Yeah, can I just say, Mr. Voice, that was my favorite story. It was I'm so glad you talked about it. It's when I finished it, no spoiler, because I want everyone to go and read this and just understand what I'm saying when I explain how I felt. I got chills because I don't know if you said when you were writing it, you weren't sure how it was going to finish. Yeah, you could have fooled me. It felt planned. It was so good. It was so good. And everyone just needs to go read that one. If anything, that one specifically.
And luckily it's first in the book. So if you read that one, you can return to the library for the next person in line.
Exactly.
Did you also, did you know where Friend's Friend Has Cancer was going? I mean, I can see that one took a turn.
Yeah.
In a way that was like, again, in retrospect, is absolutely perfect and necessary and amazing. But when I was reading it for the first time, I was like, was this where it was going all along, or did the story sort of take over from you? And
it's so Friend's Friend Has Cancer. I was in New York. I was waiting to see a play. And then the people sitting next to me weren't actually saying any of those things. It was just, they were having some other conversation. I was doing what I do in journals. I sometimes take notes of conversations, and I thought, how creepy, how weird that I'm doing this. And then I started inventing what they were saying. And I had this sort of idea, what if they had to do what I invented? What if I somehow changed their reality? So that story was a sort of conceptual existential crisis of and then I went and saw King Charles II, the great play that takes the modern royal family, Charles and Diana and Queen Elizabeth, and puts them in Shakespearean iambic pentameter. And it was so thrilling that it's sometimes seeing something like that just makes me want to go write. And so I wrote the first draft of that in my hotel room in New York after seeing the play and having this lunch where I was just writing down all the conversations around me. And it's an old thing I've done since I was in my early 20s. I just sit and steal conversations and listen to the way people talk and try to get that rhythm down and the way they really talk, and so one of the great things about this one is they're having 4 different conversations at once, and just trying to keep those conversations separate, and and then creating the obnoxious character of the writer, who was a little bit like that thinned version of me on the graphic,
with the leather coat.
Yes, yeah, right, yeah.
Oh, I'm just going to chime in too and tell you how much I love that one, and all of them. But you start off with so powerfully with the first story about the voice, and that story about
the voice. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, that's the thing about this, that there's just these stories are so far reaching, and they're everywhere. There's something for everybody in this book. And again, we can't talk too much about it because the joy is in the read. But is there one story that, I don't know, that you love more than the others? We won't tell the others, so don't.
Yeah. Uh, I always make the joke that when people ask that, you're supposed to answer no. They're like my children, and I love them all, but I really love one of my children more, but I don't really. Yeah, I mean, it's funny when a writer looks at stories, like I said, I remember the moment of conception sometimes. So, the Angel of Rome stayed in an old convent in the Janiculum Hill, brought my family for the first time. I'd been wanting to bring my family to Rome since they were babies. And by the time I did, the youngest was 19. And so finally gathering them all together. And I remember our last night in the hotel, and we stayed in this old convent, and you could go up on the roof. And we brought a bottle of wine up on the roof, and we just sat up there. And it was this transcendent, profound moment, looking around at these people, and no one said a word. And the silence was just kind of exquisite. And so wanting to go back to Trastevere and wanting to write a story that covered a life, that had that Alice Munro feel. Did I just compare myself to Alice Munro? I'll probably burst the flame, but that trying to capture the fullness of a life, with a character coming of age, and then and then seeing where that goes. And as often happens, that little glimpse of an idea becomes something totally unrecognizable. A TV star, an American TV star, and a famous Italian actress who never made it in the United States, and a kid who's studying Latin, but the American TV star thinks that either he's studying Italian or that Latin is spoken in Rome, and hires him to be translator.
Yeah.
You just end up in these, often this in this kind of creative reverie that is so different than the moment that started. If you would have told me that moment on the rooftop, looking out at the terracotta and the stone walls of Rome wouldn't even show up in the story, I wouldn't have believed it. But so I think, and then just working with Eduardo on that story and the very different way that we wrote it. I flew to New York and during the pandemic, and rented a place, and to table read a story, to hear this great actor read these characters, and then design the characters themselves, and debate the voices. And he was trying different voices, and I finally said, what about late model Harrison Ford for the American actor? And he's like, oh my God, yes. And of course, being so talented, Eduardo just nailed that. So I think that in many ways, but there are so many stories that I love. There's one called Before You Blow, a really simple story about a girl who dates a college boy, and then comes back later to find that he's a lawyer, and sees on a bus bench his advertisement, which he's clearly the lowest kind of lawyer, because it says, before you blow, call Joe. Before you blow into a breathalyzer. And that moment of recognition as she's a mother herself. There are moments like that are, again, they remind me of those moments at the drive-in, little flashes from movies that I saw that stick with me.
Right. Yeah, they're so tender. So many of these stories are so, I don't know, they're just so heartfelt and tender, and then funny, and it's, I don't know, they're just Angel of Rome is really amazing. It's it gets so convoluted in the beginning with the we should get to some questions, because librarians have been waiting. Essie, I know that you asked one.
Yeah. Yes, I asked Jennifer Winberry's, do you prefer writing short fiction or full-length novels? But speaking of inspiration for a moment, Lily and Dabney did want to know, when you get an idea to write, which comes first, character or story? Just, I know we kind of touched on it, but just to expand.
I would say story comes first with me, like an idea, but it's nothing until I have a character. And so, and often then, you know, the story itself falls away and the character becomes primal, becomes the most important thing. I've yet to have a story or a novel where the plot, you know, went where I thought, and because those characters, once you create them, you've created them in such a way that they're actually going to affect the thing that you've imagined. And writers love pretending this is some sort of magic trick that we do, that our characters act on their own. But it's really, when you create characters with certain attributes and background and past, it suggests new openings, new ideas. And sometimes I'll just be like, I know this is supposed to happen, but this person would never do that, you know, as they're created. So yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, but my ideas often tend to be kind of conceptual, as germs of stories or moments, and then I find the people.
Great people that you find.
Yeah,
I
think that is, you know, like I said, I don't think they work unless you find the right people.
Yeah,
you have to cast them really well.
right. So a lot of librarians are talking, you know, when they first come on, they're like, hello from, you know, and they're all saying where they're from, and they all talk about the weather, and they're well, not all of them, but a lot of them. It's raining in Jersey, you know, and there's a man, Tim Baumbach, who says hello from the Netherlands. It's raining here as well, just like you are.
Is it? Well, it's sunny here. It's sunny and cold. We got a dusting of snow.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I love spring skiing. I can look right out this window and see Mount Spokane. And if it's clear, a lot of times my afternoon gets lost, and I just 40 minutes from front door to lift, and I can be on the mountain. So.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah. That's neat. Well, let's see. We have a question from Janet Lockhart, who says, who's a current short story writer you both wish was better known and more widely read?
Wow. I think Karen Russell is really widely known, but I love her stories. Jim Shepard, I've always thought, is a current master of short stories. I read so many good young story collections. A lot of times that's sometimes the first glimpse you get of a writer. How about you, Millicent? Is there another one that pops into your mind?
There are so many amazing people that, you know, I've met at writers' conferences over the years, etc., who, you know, have phenomenal books. But there was one, to me, it was like the sort of little book that could, for me, as an editor. It was a book called The Heaven of Animals, and the author is David James Poissant. Yeah. And we had met at Bread Loaf and sort of gotten, you know, sort of clicked over dinner, and he sent me, I was reading his stories that were in from an agent at the time, and I was just like, I have to find this author, and I have to get inside his head, because my God, he has made these people so vivid, and these situations, some of which were kind of bizarre, and some of which were very normal, but extremely kind of deeply felt, and, you know, again, wide-ranging, like yours, Jess. And you know, and it was one of the very first kind of deeply passion project type books that I had as a young editor, and, you know, where I was just like, you have to read this book to anyone, and I was giving it to people, you know, to agents and you know, anyone I basically met on the street if I happened to have a galley with me. And I would eventually get an email back from the person that I had given it to, and so I started an entire archive on my email called the Holy Shit emails, because inevitably, whether it was 20 minutes later or 4 months later, I would get an email from someone saying, holy shit, why didn't I know about this guy? So all right, well, I'm probably not allowed to use that language. I'm sorry.
I know how to start my email when I read it. I'll I'm
gonna send it to you.
I will. And I will holy shit right back at you.
That's my like 10-year-old plug for a book that I still, you know, that's what we do as editors. We fall in love, and then we, like, whether you want us to or not, we're like your, you know, doting grandmothers forever and ever, and just being like, can you believe what, my grandkid did, what my kid did. Take a look at little Johnny here. And you just, they're in your heart forever.
That's terrific.
Janet Lockhart just said librarians love salty language. So Millicent, here's the company.
Boy, do I know that. Yeah.
Yeah, you do. Lisa Casper in Colorado said that you, she said she loves all your books and she looks forward to this one. And she says that you are also the best literary sojourn MC ever.
Oh, wow. Thank you. I will take that. I'm the only one that I know, but that's a great event, the Literary Sojourn. And we had to do it virtually this year, but it's such an amazing event and a great chance, like one of those just great chances for authors to be around readers. It's the thing that I think we all miss in the last couple of years.
Yeah. Essie, do you have a question?
Yeah, there's two here. One is from Linda Payne. I think I could put these into one. Linda Payne asked, what do you do for research? And then Lillian Dabney asked, how does your writing process differ between short stories and novels? I want to say I love that you made the little analogy there where short stories is like dating and novels are like marriage. So I want to hear more about that too.
And I think that's one of the reasons we teach short stories often in creative writing programs is, you can complete one in a quarter or a semester or, in a class. And, that short amount of dating. As far as research, I have an entire research department, which is also me. And I actually love it. I love throwing myself into library microfilm and traveling for research. I remember one time I was writing nonfiction, and I was writing about someone stepping out of their car into the day, and I needed the weather, into the cold, into the sun. What was it? So I drove 90 miles away to the library, pulled out the newspaper from that day, read the weather, went back and typed sun, And so it's a little bit, it's a little quixotic being a researcher for a novelist. And with, my last novel, The Cold Millions, I just read so many books, and I came across this incredibly helpful unpublished dissertation of a history student from 20 years ago who had sources I'd never found. It was so helpful. And then to be able to, in the acknowledgements, thank this history student for their dissertation. You find these great gems. But as I often joke, at one point I have to fire the whole research department and just turn it over to the fiction people, or nothing gets done. I can research myself into oblivion, and then and at some point you're not trying to know everything. Much like the character in Angel of Rome, you're just trying to be fluent. You're trying to be fluent in the world you're writing so that you speak that language. And that's usually when I have to let that go. As far as the difference between writing novels and short stories, the process itself isn't that different. With novels, I eventually have to use some sort of organizational tool. I have a big wall chart, and I'll write out where the chapters are going, what's happening. At some point, I'll have to step over it and see it from a distance. With short stories, I think I just remain in them usually until they're done. But at some point with novels, actually about 11 or 12 or 68 times, I'll be sort of thrown out of the world, and I have to go research or tear it apart and start over. That they are structurally so much more so much more advanced and difficult, and there's never a moment when I haven't taken a novel down to the studs and built it right up again. Whereas stories, if you're lucky, they kind of complete themselves, and because there's sort of less at stake, you can also afford to have them be incomplete. When I went to put this collection together, I looked at every story I'd written since 2012, and I was surprised to see I'd published almost 60. And so for the 13 in this book represent the best, and the ones that I thought fit together the most, that had some thematic coherence, and it was hard to let some of those go, but some of them, are just experiments that no one ever needs to read again too. So
Wow. That's I'm so, I don't know, I'm kind of envious for people who get to read this collection for the first time, because there's this I don't know, there's this like connective tissue between them, and I don't really even know what they are. I mean, the general idea is to, what you put forth and what's really going on, but it's so much more than that, and they're
yeah.
just so memorable, these people, these characters.
Yeah, that's the fun for the writer too, is realizing you're pulling this thread through, and there's not a lot of secrets. It's often the things you're going through in life, the family, losing people. My father has Alzheimer's. It's not a shock that there's a story in there about a son whose father has Alzheimer's. A lot of times they're personal things, and yet a lot of times they're just the things that you're thinking, noticing, feeling. I think being a dad and watching my kids grow into adulthood has made me such a wistful sap that there's probably a wistful sappiness that runs through the stories too. But because it's embedded in humor and sometimes darkness, I hope that it's earned. That's all you can hope, is that the sentimentality you feel creeping over you, like back hair on an older man, is like all you can hope is that it's earned. So
this book in so many ways does remind me of Beautiful Ruins. It has besides this kind of thematic connections with Angel of Rome and with Italy, I think there's that feeling in the book that, like, you've got all the same, kind of brilliant complexity and depth of these characters that are real across all of your books. But in Beautiful Ruins, you feel like you feel carried as a reader. And here too, it's like I'm fascinated, and I'm, just addicted to reading each of the stories, as you go through, but there's never that kind of, nervousness about, like, what am I going to be sort of broken and destroyed by the end of this story, which, like, sometimes is exactly what I want, and which very well how to deliver. But there's something, I feel like right now in this, sort of year 3 of a pandemic and everything that we've all been through, like, this is so exactly the sort of book that I want to read right now, in the same way that Beautiful Ruins was back then. And there's so much, like, speaking of trust, like, as a reader, these stories inspire so much, sort of like, you want to hand over all of your emotions to Jess Walter while you're holding the book.
It's funny you mentioned Beautiful Ruins, because when I had finished a draft of that originally, where Pasquale never finds Dee, she's long since dead, and I finished it, and as a writer, you write sometimes in fear of sentimentality, of unearned feeling. And I remember thinking, well, why would I care about these lives if they didn't ever get to see each other? So I rewrote the entire thing, then that was over a 15-year period that it was called The Hotel Adequate View at one time, and had 3 or 4 different titles. And by the time I wrote that last draft, I had spent 15 years with those characters, with those people, and I wanted them to have a moment, and that felt to me like not too much to ask. And I think that difference between that, realizing that difference, writing that book, between sentiment and sentimentality, between earned emotion and just the statement of emotion, was really important to me. And I think so. I think I appreciate that comparison. And I think it came through really in the way these stories came about too, because I think most of them I was writing still in that vein, trying to get at real feeling and emotion through these characters.
Yeah. And sometimes I think, it doesn't make a story less, sophisticated or literary or meaningful to learn that the truth doesn't have to destroy us. Like the truth can, in fact, can hold us.
Well, I think to find hope, even in darkness, even in sadness, I and especially in humor, I love what Kafka said, that there is always hope, but not for us. And some people take that to be so depressing. I find such great humorous joy in that, because the first part of that is also the second. There's always hope, but not for us, but there is always hope, the way it circles back around. And I think I write for, characters finding hopeful moments. I do think it's what keeps us moving forward.
Yeah. We could go on and on because there's more questions here, and it's terrific, but just a few more before we have to go.
I'll answer them quickly.
Okay. You're fine. This is so wonderful, all of it. The conversation between you, Millicent and Jess, your conversation is just so, it's really enlightening and really informative. And Millicent, I love what you said about Beautiful Ruins and how this does feel parallel in a way, or intersecting, I think. I felt the same way. I'm a huge fan of that book. I love all your books, but well, we can go on, but anyway, there's definitely that feeling. Okay, Nicole Williams wants to know, what are you currently reading?
What am I reading? I'm actually reading several books about the Virgin Islands. That's kind of the next place that I want to go with my fiction. So I'm really slowly making my way through the biography of J. Robert Oppenheimer, which Millicent knows well. And then the last fiction that I read was Great Circle, which I thought was terrific. One of those transporting novels, story of stories, and really loved that. I am also in a Shakespeare club, and we read one play and talk about it. We're reading Comedy of Errors for, I believe, the 15th time. So I'm also reading that.
You find new things in it when you read it?
Oh my goodness! Every time it just explodes our minds. Yeah. And if you haven't read Hamnet, I have to tell you to read Hamnet, and which is just another terrific novel. But we had an entire Shakespeare Club meeting about that one. So just in case you thought there was something nerdier than writers, it's writers belonging to a Shakespeare Club.
So Tim Bombacht, who's in the reigning Netherlands, wants to know.
Lucky, I love the Netherlands.
Yep.
Big Amsterdam fan.
He wants to know, do you ever get discouraged when you have to throw a story away and start over?
Yeah, you always get discouraged. It's such a part of the process that, but you cling to things. There's that old saying that you have to kill your darlings. And sometimes I think it's better to kill the stuff that isn't so darling, and to try to work around the darlings. So, and because of that, I don't ever throw anything away. I keep files forever. That's why Beautiful Ruins took 15 years, is because I failed at it for 14. I just kept coming back to it because there was something in those characters that I couldn't walk away from. It's such a long game writing. It's so, some of these stories where I had the germ of an idea, 15, 20 years ago, and then wasn't ready to write it. But if you keep all those little things, magpie-like, all your little bits of garbage just go back to the nest, and you just keep packing them into that nest. Eventually you find your way into things, and it's shocking how often something that failed comes back around. Sometimes they just fail. I have 2 novels in my garage that can attest to that. One typed on an IBM Selectric right after college.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Maybe something will come of that one day. Who knows?
I don't know. Every time I read it, I think it's worse. So it's. It might just have been something I had to get out of my system. It's well typed though. It's impeccably typed.
One more question from Lily and Dabney. Other than War and Peace, what are some other big books that you are fond of?
Oh, so many. Let's see. The Brothers Karamazov, I really love. I am a big fan of Russian literature, obviously. Some other big books. Don Quixote. I marvel at the novel, which was invented in experimentation. Tristram Shandy and Don Quixote, and I love reading work from that time. Boy, I love James Baldwin, and we talked earlier about Flannery O'Connor. I don't know if those are big books or not, but I think of them as, seminal books. There are so many. It's in some ways the hardest question, because your brain just freezes. You try to think of everything that you read and loved. But I always tell people to come up with a list of 3 books or 3 authors, as if you were starting a religion like Catholicism and you needed a trinity. And I'm constantly replacing things on my trinity. But books that have been on there forever are 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut, and The White Album by Joan Didion. For years, that was my trinity. Every once in a while, Don DeLillo would try to sneak on there, but he was so cold, the others would toss him off. And but I think those, when some Steinbeck tried to sneak on there and he was too sappy. And so I think those 3 have probably been on the top of that pyramid the longest, but it's a giant pyramid. It goes out forever.
That's fantastic. I wanted, excuse me, I wanted to mention that in the chat, there is a link that we put in, which is a conversation that you and Nancy Pearl had back in June of 2020, I think.
Yeah, best.
When we were talking about your recent called Millions. And so you both came on Facebook Live on Door to Door. So, and that is a really interesting conversation, because you're both talking about books, and it's just a volley of these wonderful books that you're, and I think at one point I even said, like, there isn't a book that one of you has said that the other one hasn't heard of and or read. Really
volleying books with Nancy is like, stepping in with Serena. She will hit everything back at you. You will not win volleying books with Nancy Pearl. So all I tried to do is just hit some lame shots back over the net, because she's an impeccable reader. Yeah.
You both hit a grand slam.
It's nice of you to say, but I think she's on steroids. She's so good at it, honestly.
She's on book steroids. You're totally right.
She is totally on book steroids. She should be tested. Yeah.
She would take that as such a compliment.
She really would, yeah.
Meant as one, honestly.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. So that's there, and the hour has flown, and Millicent, I don't want to. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on with Jess before we wrap things up?
I feel like, again, I could talk forever, but I get to talk to him whenever I want to. One thing, that I do want to, we've talked about this a little bit, just in sort of brainstorming, is, it's less a question than something I just want to make sure kind of gets said in this forum, is that I think the Angel of Rome audiobook is so, did so well and is so well known, and I think it's really important that people understand that is 1/12 of this really truly incredible experience of a book, and like everything that you love in hearing the audio version of Angel of Rome is multiplied by 12 when you read the rest of this book. And so I think there's always the danger of a little confusion there, because they do have similar names, but I think just making sure everybody knows that one, like that you can have 12 times that experience reading the full book.
Yeah, continuing that album theme. If you heard that song on the radio, you should buy the whole album. So.
Exactly.
I love that. I love when you talked before about, you buy the album for the 2 songs that you love, And the next thing you know, you eventually get around to the rest of them, and it's that discoverability that that's so exciting. And discoverability in libraries is something that librarians know very well. That's what happens in libraries. And so we're really glad that that you, Jess, and you, Millicent, were here today to talk about this collection of stories, The Angel of Rome, which goes on sale June 28th. So there's plenty of time you can download it on a NetGalley or a device. We've got the links right there. You'll meet people that characters that you just won't forget, and they're so authentic and I don't know, they're tender and they're fun and it's sweet and it's sad and it's a terrific collection. And Jess, we can't thank you enough for writing it, for bringing all these people to us.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for getting me out to some more librarians, my favorite people. So see you in the stacks, I hope.
Well, for sure. And please, librarians, spread the word. Jess is very happy to come and do virtual or in-person visits to your library. Jess told me, you may have told me this before, but I don't remember, but your sister being a librarian.
My sister was a county library director forever and just retired. But when she said, you can't ever charge libraries money. And I said, because we're so strapped. And I said, okay, I won't. And I'm doing a bunch of big read events for the Cold Millions through various library districts. So yeah, it's one of my favorite places to, obviously it's the place I grew into a writer and first aspired to it. So it's a holy place for me. So I love going there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. So folks, you know how to get in touch with us if you want to get in touch with Jess. And we thank you again, Jess and Millicent.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Spending the hour with us to talk about your book. And we are so excited to have you here. So The Angel of Rome, collection of short stories, on sale June 28th. Jess, take good care. We'll be in touch. And
All right.
Thank you again.
Bye,
Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Bye, everyone. See you on
Bye, everyone.
Tuesday. Bye.